Captain Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive alien council chamber and felt very small. The room stretched up so high that he could not see the ceiling. 47 different alien species sat in circles around him. Their eyes, tentacles, sensors, and other things he could not name all focused on him and Ambassador Lisa Carter, who stood beside him. The Council of Five sat on a raised platform above everyone else. These were the most powerful aliens in the galaxy. The Zephyrian. Chancellor looked like a tall crystal statue that somehow moved and talked. Its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but the words were cold and hard. Jake had been a soldier for 30 years before becoming a diplomat. He had fought in 3 wars and survived encounters with space pirates, deadly aliens, and cosmic storms. But standing here in this chamber made him feel like a child being scolded by adults who thought they knew better. The Zephyrian Chancellor raised one crystalline hand, and the entire chamber fell silent. When it spoke, every word was translated into dozens of languages by machines that floated near each delegate. Humanity has been part of our galactic community for 50 years, the Chancellor said. We welcomed you when you were young and primitive. We shared our technology and our wisdom. We gave you the stars and asked only that you follow our ways of peace and logic. Lisa Carter kept her face calm, but Jake could see her hands were tight behind her back. They both knew what was coming. Yet you have failed to learn, continued a new voice. This came from the Vorthon Prime Minister, a being with 6 arms and skin that changed colors as it talked. Your species continues to make decisions based on emotions rather than logic. You waste resources on lost causes. You form bonds with artificial minds instead of treating them as tools. You refuse to abandon failing colonies even when mathematics proves they cannot survive. Jake remembered the colony on Kepler 7. The Council had wanted humanity to evacuate the settlers because the planet's soil was slowly turning toxic. The logical choice was to move everyone to a safer world. But the humans had worked for 3 years to find a way to heal the soil instead. They had succeeded, and now Kepler 7 was one of the most productive agricultural worlds in the sector. The Council called this wasteful. Humans called it hope. Another alien voice joined the accusations. This one belonged to a species that looked like giant insects with too many eyes. You teach your children stories about heroes who die for others. You celebrate soldiers who sacrifice themselves for strangers. You even mourn artificial intelligences when they are destroyed. These behaviors are illogical and dangerous. Jake thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was 7 years old, and her favorite story was about a princess who gave up her crown to save a dragon that everyone else wanted to kill. The Council would probably call that story primitive and harmful. Jake called it beautiful. Most concerning of all, the Zephyrian Chancellor continued, you persist in using violence as a solution to problems. When the Raider clans attacked civilian ships in the Badlands, our Peace Corps would have negotiated a settlement. Instead, your military hunted them across 6 star systems and destroyed their fleets. When the plague ships threatened the core worlds, we would have quarantined the affected areas. You sent medical teams directly into the infection zones and refused to leave until everyone was cured or dead, Lisa finally spoke. And both times, our methods worked. Your methods were chaotic and unpredictable, the Chancellor replied. Success, achieved through chaos, is not true success. It is luck, and luck always runs out. The insect alien clicked its mandibles together in what Jake had learned was their version of disapproval. The Council has debated this issue for many cycles. We have reached a decision. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had hoped they would have more time, but Earth's intelligence services had been warning for months that this moment was coming. Humanity must choose, the Vorthon Prime Minister announced. You will conform to our standards of logical, efficient civilization, or you will remove yourselves from galactic affairs entirely. You have 1 standard galactic year to make your decision and implement whatever changes are necessary. The chamber, erupted in noise as dozens of alien species began talking at once in their various languages. Some sounded approving, others seemed upset, and a few were clearly confused. Jake noticed that most of the approval came from the more powerful species, while the upset voices belonged to smaller civilizations that had often worked closely with humans. Lisa looked at Jake and he saw something in her eyes that the aliens had probably missed. It was not surprise or fear or anger. It was relief. Earth's government had been preparing for this moment and had already made their choice. "With respect, honored council," Lisa said, her voice cutting through the noise, "we choose neither option." The chamber fell silent so quickly that Jake could hear the hum of the translation machines. "We choose to walk away," Jake said quietly. "Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from all galactic treaties, trade agreements, and cooperative ventures. We will remove our personnel from joint stations and return to Sol system within 6 months." The silence stretched on for long. Seconds. Then the Zephyrian Chancellor leaned forward, its crystalline features somehow managing to show surprise. "You cannot be serious," it said. "Without galactic civilization, your species will stagnate. You will be alone in a hostile universe." Lisa smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "Humans have always done their best work when everyone else said it was impossible." Jake and Lisa turned and walked toward the chamber exit. Behind them, the noise of dozens of alien voices rose again, but they did not look back. 6 months later, Commander Ben Davis stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station and watched the last human transport ship dock with the massive research facility. The station had been humanity's greatest achievement in cooperative space. Science, a place where human researchers worked alongside aliens from 12 different species to unlock the secrets of the universe. Now it was time to pack up and go home. Dr. Amy Foster pushed a hover cart full of data storage devices down the corridor toward the docking bay. Her research on quantum biology had been making breakthrough discoveries every few months, working with her Altarian colleague Dr. Kelthan to find cures for diseases that had plagued multiple species for centuries. "It breaks my heart to leave this behind," Amy said as she passed Ben. "We were so close to curing the bleeding plague. Another few months and we could have saved millions of lives on the rim worlds." Ben nodded but did not stop his inspection of the evacuation procedures. Earth's orders had been very clear. Everything human was to be removed or destroyed. No technology, no research, no equipment could be left behind for the aliens to use. The Council had made it clear they did not want humanity's chaotic influence, contaminating their orderly civilization. "Orders are orders," Ben replied. "The Council voted to remove us from galactic affairs. They get what they asked for." In the main laboratory, Amy's research partner, Dr. Kelthan, watched sadly as she disconnected her equipment. The tall, blue-skinned Altarian had worked with humans for over a decade and had developed what his own people considered an unhealthy attachment to human methods of research. "Your approach to science has always puzzled my people," Kelthan said, his forearms moving in a gesture of confusion. "You ignore logical research paths and follow hunches. You test theories that mathematics says cannot work. You waste time on problems that have no efficient solutions." Amy smiled as she carefully packed a device that looked like a glowing crystal wrapped in metal wires. "And somehow we keep making discoveries that surprise everyone?" "Yes," Kelthan agreed. "That is what puzzles us most of all." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of human installations. Mining stations that had been feeding rare minerals to alien economies shut down their operations. Communication. Relays that had allowed faster-than-light messaging across 3 spiral arms went dark. Research facilities, trading posts, and diplomatic stations all emptied as humans packed up 50 years of galactic civilization and prepared to return to their home system. The evacuation that drew the most attention happened in the Badlands, a region of space on the galactic frontier where pirates and raiders had always been a problem. Captain Steve Miller received his recall orders while his ship, the Earth vessel Defiance, was escorting a Kelverite merchant convoy through one of the most dangerous shipping lanes in known space. The convoy's military escort commander, a proud, Kelverite warrior named Zethka, could not understand why the humans were leaving at such a critical time. "Your people have fought beside us for 10 years, Zethka said over the communication channel. "You know these shipping lanes better than anyone. You know how the raiders think and how they fight. Why abandon us now when we need you most?" Steve looked at the tactical display showing 3 Kelverite warships trying to protect a convoy of 20 merchant vessels. The Kelverites were good fighters, but they followed standard military doctrine. They positioned their ships according to regulations and responded to threats with approved tactics. The raiders had learned to predict these responses and plan their attacks accordingly. "Because your government voted with the council," Steve said sadly. "They decided our methods were too brutal and unpredictable. They want peacekeepers who follow proper protocols, not ones who actually win battles." Zethka's translator did not convey emotion very well, but Steve could hear the frustration in the alien warrior's voice. "Protocol does not stop raiders from killing merchants." "No," Steve agreed. "But apparently protocol is more important than results. The human withdrawal from military operations was felt most strongly by the species who had fought alongside them. Humans had a reputation for being willing to take risks that other species considered insane. They would chase pirates through asteroid fields, engage enemies that outnumbered them 3-1, and fight holding actions that gave civilians time to escape even when their own survival was unlikely. Other species called these tactics reckless and wasteful. They pointed out that humans took higher casualties than any other military force in the galaxy. What they did not mention was that human-protected regions had the lowest civilian death rates and the highest mission success percentages. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez commanded the last human Marine unit to leave the Outer Rim territories. Her battalion had been stationed on Frontier Base 7, a strategic outpost that guarded the shipping lanes between the core worlds and the resource-rich but dangerous frontier systems. As her ships prepared to depart, she received a message from the base's alien commander, a logical and efficient Vorthon officer named Texavar. "I do not understand your recall," Texavar said. "My reports consistently rated human Marines as highly effective. Your casualty rates were acceptable, and your mission completion statistics exceeded all projected parameters." Sarah finished loading her personal gear onto the transport and turned to face the alien officer. "Effective is not the same as proper," she said. "Your own government's representatives voted to have us removed because we do not follow regulations closely enough." "Regulations exist to minimize risk and maximize efficiency," Texavar replied. "And sometimes regulations get people killed," Sarah said. "When raiders attack a civilian station, we do not wait for proper authorization to respond. When a colony sends a distress signal, we do not calculate the cost-benefit ratio before mounting a rescue. We just go." Texavar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion among his species. "But how do you determine if an action is worth the resources required?" Sarah smiled. "If people need help, it is worth it. That is all the calculation. We need." As human ships departed from stations, bases, and outposts across the galaxy, they left behind confused allies and nervous enemies. Some alien species had grown dependent on human protection, human technology, or human trade agreements. Others had been quietly grateful that humans were willing to handle problems that were too messy or dangerous for civilized species to deal with directly. The galaxy was about to learn what it was like to function without the chaotic, unpredictable, and stubbornly helpful influence of humanity. Most aliens expected the transition to be smooth and efficient. They believed that removing emotional decision-making and illogical risk-taking would make everything run better. They were about to discover how wrong they could be. 3 years had passed since the last human ship disappeared into the dark space beyond the galactic rim. The galaxy had learned to function without humanity, and by all official measurements, things were running more efficiently than ever before. The Altarian Confederacy had taken control of the mining operations that humans had abandoned. They installed automated systems that followed precise mathematical models to extract resources with minimal waste. Production dropped by 60%, but the new systems were clean, predictable, and logical. The Confederacy declared this an improvement because efficiency mattered more than raw output. Dr. Kelthan stood in his laboratory looking at the same research data he had been staring at for 6 months. Without Amy Foster's chaotic research methods, progress on curing the bleeding plague had slowed to almost nothing. The disease continued to ravage frontier worlds, but the logical approach suggested that abandoning those worlds would be more cost-effective than developing expensive treatments. Computer display probability matrices for biological solution pathways, Kelthan said to his research system. The holographic display showed hundreds of potential research directions, each with calculated probability percentages for success. Every logical path showed success rates below 5%. The computer recommended focusing resources on evacuation procedures instead of medical research. Kelthan dismissed the display with an angry gesture. Amy would have looked at those same statistics and chosen the most impossible option just to see what would happen. She had called it intuition, but her colleagues had called it madness. The funny thing was, her mad hunches had worked more often than anyone's logical calculations. Across the galaxy, the Vorthan Republic had assumed control of the communication networks that humans had built and maintained. They streamlined the systems according to mathematical principles, removing what they called unnecessary emotional content from messages. Efficiency improved by 30% when measured by data transmission rates. What the measurements did not capture was that the networks had become cold and sterile. Messages between family members were compressed to basic information packets. Cultural exchanges between species were reduced to statistical summaries. The galaxy had become more connected in technical terms, but somehow felt more isolated than ever before. The most visible change came in the area of galactic security. The Galactic Peace Corps had completely replaced human military units with forces led by Zephyrian battle computers. These artificial intelligences made tactical decisions based on mathematical analysis of thousands of variables. They never acted on emotion, never took unnecessary risks, and never pursued enemies beyond optimal engagement ranges. Captain Zethka of the Kelverite Defense Force watched from his ship's bridge as a Peace Corps fleet responded to a raider attack on a merchant convoy. The attack was taking place near the Badlands, in the same shipping lane where Steve Miller and his human crew had once provided protection. The Peace Corps fleet arrived exactly on schedule and deployed according to standard defensive protocols. Their formations were textbook perfect, their response times were optimal, and their coordination was flawless. When the raiders realized they were outgunned, they turned and fled toward an asteroid field. The Peace Corps fleet did not pursue. Peace. Corp Command, this is Zethka, the Kelverite warrior said into his communicator. The raiders are escaping. They will simply regroup and attack another convoy. The response came from a Zephyrian battle computer, its voice emotionless and precise. Pursuit probability calculations indicate unacceptable risk-to-benefit ratio. Asteroid field provides tactical advantage to smaller vessels. Logical response is to maintain defensive posture and protect remaining merchant ships. Zethka watched the raider ships disappear into the asteroid field where they would hide until the Peace Corps fleet left. Then they would emerge and attack. The next convoy to pass through this area. It was a pattern that had repeated dozens of times since the humans departed. A human captain would have followed them, Zethka muttered to his crew. Human captains took unnecessary risks. His tactical officer replied. The statistics prove that Peace Corps methods result in lower casualty rates. Yes, Zethka agreed, but they also result in more raider attacks. The mathematical truth was that Peace Corps fleets suffered fewer losses than human forces had. The practical truth was that raider activity had increased by 400% since humans stopped hunting pirates to the ends of the galaxy. The logical response was to avoid dangerous areas rather than make them safe. In the council chambers, representatives from the 47 galactic civilizations reviewed efficiency reports with satisfaction. Crime in civilized space was down, largely because the Peace Corps no longer pursued criminals into dangerous or uneconomical regions. Resource allocation had improved by demonstrable percentages, mostly by abandoning unprofitable worlds and colonies rather than wasting resources trying to help them. The galaxy is more peaceful without human interference, the Zephyrian Chancellor announced to the Assembly. All measurable metrics show continued improvement in galactic civilization. The Vorthan Prime Minister displayed a holographic chart showing statistical improvements in dozens of categories. Logical decision-making has eliminated the waste and inefficiency caused by emotional responses. We have achieved the orderly society that our species have sought for millennia. But representatives from smaller species, particularly those on the frontier worlds, were less enthusiastic about the improvements. Senator Ruth Palmer of the Kelverite Union raised a concern that had been growing for months. Honorable Council, while our core systems enjoy improved efficiency, conditions on frontier worlds continue to deteriorate. Raider attacks are at historic highs. Disease outbreaks go untreated because medical intervention is deemed uneconomical. Colony failures are accepted rather than prevented. The Chancellor's crystalline features remained impassive. Frontier territories have always been inherently unstable. The logical response is gradual evacuation to more secure systems, not wasteful attempts to maintain unsustainable settlements. And what of the beings who call those worlds home? Ruth asked. Resources are finite, the Chancellor replied. Proper allocation requires difficult decisions based on mathematical analysis rather than emotional attachment. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was predetermined. The Council of Five controlled the majority vote, and they were satisfied with the new order. The galaxy was more logical, more efficient, and more peaceful than it had ever been. What they did not know was that in the dark spaces between stars, something ancient and hungry had begun to stir. The raiders that once fled from human pursuit had grown bold and organized. Pirates who had been hunted to near extinction were rebuilding their fleets, and in the deepest regions of unexplored space, an entity that had slumbered for eons was starting to wake. The galaxy had chosen order over chaos, logic over emotion, efficiency over sacrifice. They had removed the one species that refused to accept mathematical inevitability, that insisted on fighting impossible battles, that believed some things were worth any cost. They were about to learn why their ancestors had valued such stubborn, unreasonable courage. The first reports came from the frontier worlds that the Council had already written off as unsustainable. Ships were disappearing along the outer rim trade routes, but not in the usual way that pirates or equipment failures caused vessels to vanish. These ships simply stopped existing, leaving no debris, no distress signals, and no trace that they had ever been there at all. Senator Ruth Palmer of the Kelverite Union brought the reports to the Council's attention during a routine session on resource allocation. She had been trying for months to get the Council to pay attention to deteriorating conditions on the frontier, but this was different from raiders or plague outbreaks. 17 colonies have gone silent in the past month, Ruth reported to the Assembly. Long-range scans show no life signs, but also no evidence of destruction, evacuation, or natural disaster. The settlements are simply empty. The Vorthan Prime Minister consulted its data processing systems before responding. Probability assessment indicates natural migration patterns or localized disaster events. Frontier worlds are inherently unstable and prone to sudden population shifts. The logical response is accelerated evacuation of remaining colonies to more secure systems. Ruth's hands clenched at her sides, a reaction that reminded observers of human emotional responses. We are talking about millions of beings who have simply vanished without explanation. Do we not have an obligation to investigate? Resources are finite, the Zephyrian Chancellor replied with its usual crystalline calmness. We cannot justify deploying fleet assets to investigate every anomaly in uneconomical territories. The mathematical analysis clearly shows that frontier evacuation provides the highest probability of civilian survival. But the disappearances did not stop at the frontier. They began moving inward, following ancient space lanes that human explorers had mapped decades earlier but never fully investigated. The pattern was subtle at first, affecting only the most isolated outposts and research stations. Then entire systems began going dark. The Council finally authorized Peace Corps investigation teams when the phenomenon reached territories that contained profitable mining operations. The teams were carefully assembled according to optimal crew compositions and equipped with the most advanced sensors and weapons that galactic technology could provide. None of the investigation teams ever reported back. Dr. Kelthon made a discovery that filled him with dread while reviewing the disappearance data in his laboratory. Working late one night, he compared the pattern of vanished worlds with astronomical charts from his people's most ancient archives. The match was terrifyingly exact. The pattern followed star maps that were older than most current civilizations, drawn during an era when his people still told stories about cosmic horrors that devoured entire systems. The legends spoke of something called the Void Harvest, a force that had nearly destroyed all life in the galaxy before the rise of modern civilization. According to the myths, the Void Harvest had only been stopped by a coalition of species who fought with desperate courage and illogical sacrifice. The stories described warriors who threw their lives away in hopeless battles, scientists who chose impossible research paths, and leaders who made decisions based on faith rather than mathematics. Kelton submitted his findings to the Council, requesting immediate action based on the historical parallels. His report was dismissed as unscientific speculation, unsuitable for logical decision-making. Meanwhile, in the dark space beyond the galactic rim, Admiral Kate Sullivan received the first message that Earth had gotten from known space in 3 years. The transmission came through an old emergency channel that humans had established for their deep space exploration missions. Admiral, this is Ben Davis broadcasting from the independent trading vessel New Horizon, the message began. I do not know if Earth is monitoring these frequencies, but I need to tell someone what I have seen out here. Kate had known Ben since their academy days. He had been one of the human ship captains who chose to remain in galactic space as an independent trader rather than return to Earth with the official evacuation. A few thousand humans had made similar choices, operating small vessels in the frontier territories where their services were still valued by local populations. Something is very wrong in the galaxy, Ben's message continued. Entire systems are going dark, and it is not raiders or disease or war. The few refugees I have encountered describe something that makes no sense. They speak of darkness that consumes everything it touches, of space itself being digested and converted into something else. Kate forwarded the message to Earth's High Command and continued monitoring the emergency frequencies. Over the following weeks, more messages arrived from scattered human traders and explorers who had remained in galactic space. The reports painted a picture of growing horror that the galactic authorities were either ignoring or incapable of understanding. The entity, for lack of a better term, appeared to feed on order itself. It consumed civilized worlds more easily than primitive ones, advanced technology more readily than simple tools, and logical thought patterns more completely than chaotic ones. The few survivors who escaped its advance described a presence that turned mathematics against itself and made scientific instruments report impossible readings. Captain Steve Miller, who had been operating his ship in the Badlands since the human withdrawal, sent a message that made Kate's blood run cold. "Chets. Thing is learning," Steve reported. "Each time it encounters organized resistance, it adapts faster than before." The Peace Corps sent 3 full battle fleets to engage it, and all 3 fleets simply stopped responding to communications. Whatever this entity is, it understands our weapons, our tactics, and our technology better than we understand them. Ourselves, the crisis deepened rapidly as the entity's advance accelerated. Peace Corps fleets that approached the affected regions either vanished completely or returned with crews that could not remember what they had encountered. Automated probes sent to gather data came back with recordings that showed space-time, itself being unraveled and rewoven into patterns that violated the basic laws of physics. In emergency session, the Council faced reports that their ordered, logical civilization was being systematically destroyed by something that should not be able to exist. The Zephyrian battle computers calculated probability matrices for every known defensive strategy and found success rates that approached 0. Current projections indicate total galactic consumption within 2.7 standard years, Chancellor Vexka announced to the panicked assembly. No known weapons systems can affect the entity. No logical strategy offers a probability of success greater than 0.003%. The chamber erupted in desperate discussions as representatives proposed evacuation to other galaxies, negotiation with the entity, or simple acceptance of extinction as a mathematically inevitable outcome. None of these options offered real hope, and everyone knew it. Senator Ruth Palmer stood slowly in the midst of the chaos. She had been thinking about the human withdrawal for 3 years, wondering if the Council had made a terrible mistake. Now she was certain they had. "There is one option that has not been discussed," she said, her voice cutting through the panicked noise. The chamber fell silent. "We could ask the humans for help." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Representatives who had spent 3 years congratulating themselves on removing human chaos from galactic civilization now faced the humiliating prospect of admitting they needed the very qualities they had rejected. But as the debates raged and the entity continued its inexorable advance toward the core worlds, one fact became increasingly clear. The galaxy's most logical, efficient, and orderly civilizations were completely helpless against a threat that defied rational understanding. They needed someone willing to make impossible choices, to fight unwinnable battles, and to believe that some things were worth any sacrifice. They needed the stubborn, chaotic, emotionally driven species they had driven away 3 years earlier. The debate in the Council chambers had been raging for 6 hours when the entity consumed the Altarian Research Station at Delta Centauri. The facility had housed 12,000 scientists and contained the galaxy's most advanced computational systems. It vanished in less than 10 minutes, leaving behind empty space that seemed somehow darker than the void around it. Dr. Kelthan watched the real-time sensor feeds from his laboratory and felt his 4 hearts racing with fear. The research station had been his former home, the place where he had worked with Amy Foster on cures for the incurable. Now it was gone, consumed by something that treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions. In the Council chambers, Chancellor Vexka of the Zephyrians delivered the mathematical analysis that everyone dreaded hearing. Consumption rate has increased by 47% in the past week, the crystal being announced. Current projections indicate the entity will reach the core worlds within 18 standard months. Total galactic sterilization will be complete within 2.1 years. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of translation devices. 47 civilizations, representing trillions of beings across thousands of worlds, faced the mathematical certainty of extinction. All conventional defensive strategies have been analyzed, Vexka continued. Maximum probability of success for any known approach is 0.001%. This falls within the margin of statistical error. The Vorthan Prime Minister activated a holographic display showing the entity's advance across galactic space. The infected regions, appeared as spreading darkness on the star charts, consuming everything in their path with methodical efficiency. Evacuation to the Magellanic Clouds remains theoretically possible, the Vorthon said. However, transportation capacity limits evacuation to approximately 0.3% of current galactic population. Representative after representative stood to propose desperate measures. Some suggested attempting communication with the entity. Others recommended immediate evacuation of core worlds. A few proposed surrendering selected systems in hopes of appeasing the cosmic horror. All of their proposals shared one common element. They were logical, calculated responses based on mathematical analysis of available options, and every mathematical analysis led to the same conclusion. Extinction was inevitable. Senator Ruth Palmer had been sitting quietly through hours of debate, listening to the greatest minds in galactic civilization admit they had no solution to the crisis. Finally, she rose from her seat. "Honored Council," she said, "all of our approaches share a common flaw. We are trying to fight this entity using the same logical, predictable methods that it has already proven capable of consuming." The Chancellor's crystalline features turned toward her. "Alternative approaches have been considered and rejected due to insufficient probability of success." "Have they?" Ruth asked. "Because I have reviewed our records and there is one approach that has not been attempted. There is one strategy that our probability matrices cannot calculate because it operates outside the realm of logical prediction." She paused and looked around the chamber at representatives who had spent 3 years congratulating themselves on removing chaos from their orderly civilization. "We could ask the humans for help." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Representatives from the core worlds erupted in protests about human unreliability and emotional decision-making. The species that had most strongly supported human removal began listing all the reasons why human methods were unsuitable for civilized warfare. But representatives from the frontier worlds, the species that had worked most closely with humans, began to speak up in support of Ruth's proposal. They had seen human effectiveness firsthand, had witnessed the impossible victories that humans achieved through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Human tactics show historical success rates that exceed mathematical prediction, pointed out the delegate from the Kelverite Union. Their methods appear chaotic, but their results suggest underlying patterns that our analysis systems cannot quantify. Dr. Kelthan had been sitting in the observer section, but the mention of humans prompted him to request permission to address the council. As one of the few aliens who had worked extensively with human researchers, his perspective carried weight. "Honored representatives," Kelthan began, "I have studied human behavior for over a decade. Their approach to problem-solving violates every principle of logical methodology, yet consistently produces solutions that our best computers cannot derive." He activated his own holographic display, showing research data from his years working with Amy Foster. Human scientists ignore probability calculations and pursue research paths that mathematics declares impossible. They waste resources on problems that have no efficient solutions. They make decisions based on intuition rather than analysis. The Chancellor leaned forward. "These behaviors confirm why humans were deemed unsuitable for galactic civilization." "Yes," Kelthan agreed. "But these same behaviors also produced breakthrough discoveries that saved millions of lives. Human methods are indeed chaotic and unpredictable. That may be exactly what we need against an entity that has proven capable of consuming logical thought itself." The debate continued for hours, but the mathematical reality was becoming unavoidable. Every conventional strategy led to extinction. The only unknown variable was humanity, the species that had been removed from galactic civilization precisely because they could not be predicted or calculated. Finally, desperation overcame pride. By a narrow margin, the Council voted to send a message to Sol System requesting immediate assistance. The message was brief and formal. "Galactic civilization faces imminent extinction from unknown entity. Request immediate human assistance under emergency protocols. The response came back faster than anyone expected. Within hours of sending the message, communications arrays across the galaxy detected the same reply broadcasting on dozens of frequencies. Message received. Help is on the way. Admiral Kate Sullivan had been monitoring galactic communications for 3 years, waiting for exactly this moment. Earth's High Command had been tracking the entity's progress through reports from independent human traders and had already begun mobilizing for what they knew would be humanity's most important battle. But humans did not respond to the crisis the way the Council expected. Instead of sending massive fleets or demanding formal treaties, individual human ships began appearing throughout the galaxy. Small, fast vessels crewed by humans who had never stopped caring about the people they had been forced to leave behind. Captain Jake Morrison brought his converted merchant ship to defend the Kelverite homeworld. Dr. Amy Foster arrived at the plague-stricken rim worlds with experimental cures she had continued developing in exile. Steve Miller emerged from the deep frontier with a battle-scarred vessel and a crew of volunteers who had been fighting impossible odds for 3 years. They came not as conquerors or saviors demanding gratitude, but as neighbors responding to a call for help. They brought with them the same chaotic, unpredictable, emotionally driven approach to problem-solving that the Council had rejected 3 years earlier. And for the first time since the entity had begun its advance, the mathematical certainty of extinction began to waver. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the human response from her flagship, the Resilience, a vessel that had been built in the 3 years since humanity's withdrawal from galactic space. Unlike the massive dreadnoughts that galactic civilizations favored, human ships were smaller, faster, and designed around principles that made no sense to alien military doctrine. The entity had consumed 3 more star systems while the Council debated asking for human help. Its advance had accelerated as it encountered and absorbed more organized resistance. Peace Corps fleets that engaged it according to standard military protocols were consumed within hours, their logical tactics and predictable formations proving no match for something that learned and adapted faster than they could respond. Kate's strategy made no sense to the alien military computers that tried to analyze it. She divided her forces into hundreds of small groups and scattered them across dozens of star systems. Each group operated independently with no central coordination and no unified battle plan. Human tactical deployment shows 73%. Probability of catastrophic failure, reported the Zephyrian battle computer that was monitoring human fleet movements. Individual vessel assignments violate all principles of effective force concentration. Good, Kate replied from her command bridge. The entity expects logical responses. We are going to be completely unreasonable. The first human contact with the entity occurred in the Vega system, where Captain Steve Miller and his crew encountered the leading edge of the cosmic horror. Steve's ship, the Defiance, was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had already consumed everything else in the system. Instead of retreating or calling for reinforcements, Steve did something that no galactic military computer would have recommended. He attacked. The entity's response was immediate and overwhelming. Tendrils of darkness reached out to consume Steve's ship, to digest its technology and absorb its crew into the growing void. But something unexpected happened when the entity tried to process human thought patterns. It cannot understand us, Steve reported over the emergency channels as his ship twisted through impossible maneuvers to avoid the entity's grasp. Our decisions make no mathematical sense. Every time we do something illogical, it hesitates. Dr. Amy Foster made the crucial discovery during the battle's most desperate hour. Working with Dr. Kelton from her mobile laboratory, she analyzed the entity's behavior patterns and found something that changed everything. It feeds on order, she broadcast to the human fleet. The entity consumes logical thought patterns, predictable responses, mathematical certainty. But human chaos acts like poison to it. Every time we make a decision that violates rational analysis, we hurt it. The revelation transformed the nature of the battle. human crews began deliberately, making choices that no computer would recommend. They ignored optimal firing solutions in favor of wild shots that somehow hit their targets. They abandoned defensive formations to charge directly into the entity's manifestations. They sang songs and told jokes while fighting for their lives, filling the communication channels with exactly the kind of emotional noise that galactic civilization had tried to eliminate, and the entity began to falter. Captain Jake Morrison led a squadron of converted merchant ships in a holding action that allowed the evacuation of the Altarian colony world. His tactics violated every principle of fleet combat. He split his forces, ignored supply lines, and ordered his ships to take risks that should have resulted in total annihilation. Instead, his squadron held off the entity for 18 hours, while civilian transports evacuated 3 million Altarians to safety. When asked to explain his success, Jake could only shrug. "We did not try to outthink it," he said. "We just did what felt right." The final assault was led by Ben Davis in his small trading vessel, the New Horizon, intelligence gathered by human. Scouts had located what appeared to be the entity's core manifestation, a region of space where reality itself had been twisted into impossible configurations. Every mathematical analysis showed that attacking the core directly would be suicide. The entity's defenses were strongest there, and any conventional assault would be absorbed before it could inflict damage. Ben's plan was not conventional. "I am going straight into the center," he announced to the human fleet. "No tactics, no clever maneuvering, just a direct approach that makes no sense at all." Kate tried to talk him out of it. "Ben, the probability calculations—" "I do not care about probability," Ben interrupted. "Sometimes you have to do the impossible thing just because it is right." Ben flew his ship directly into the entity's core, ignoring the tendrils of darkness that reached out to consume him. His vessel's hull began to dissolve as soon as it entered the affected region. But Ben kept flying forward, broadcasting human music and poetry on all frequencies. The entity tried to understand Ben's action, to calculate the logical purpose behind his sacrifice. But there was no logic to analyze. Ben was flying into certain death because millions of beings needed someone to do the impossible thing, and he had decided that someone would be him. In trying to process Ben's illogical sacrifice, the entity became tangled in its own consumption processes. It had evolved to absorb and utilize logical thought patterns, but human chaos was fundamentally incompatible with its nature. The more it tried to understand humanity's unreasonable courage, the more it damaged itself. Ben's ship exploded in the heart of the entity's core, creating a cascade reaction that spread through every manifestation across dozens of star systems. The cosmic horror that had threatened to consume all galactic life began to devour itself, unable to reconcile its need for order with the beautiful chaos of human sacrifice. When the darkness finally faded and normal space-time reasserted itself, the galaxy was saved. Billions of lives continued because a few thousand humans had chosen to do the unreasonable thing. In the aftermath, the Galactic Council met again in emergency session. The chamber looked the same, but everything had changed. Humans were offered full membership again, not as junior partners who needed to conform to galactic standards, but as equals whose unique perspectives were finally recognized as valuable. Ambassador Lisa Carter, now Earth's Secretary of Galactic Affairs, addressed the assembly with quiet dignity. 3 years ago, this council told us we had to choose between conformity and exile. We chose a third option, to be ourselves, regardless of what others thought was proper. Chancellor Vexka, whose perfect calculations had failed when they were needed most, spoke with something approaching humility. The galaxy has learned a valuable lesson. Order without chaos is sterile. Logic without emotion is incomplete. Efficiency without sacrifice is meaningless. Some humans accepted the offer to rejoin galactic civilization. Others chose to remain independent, continuing to explore the dark spaces and help those whom logic deemed beyond saving. But whether they served in official capacities or operated as independent agents, humans were no longer seen as a chaotic influence to be contained. They were recognized as the galaxy's immune system against the impossible, the species that could find solutions when mathematics offered none, the stubborn guardians who refused to let anyone face the darkness alone. The Council had thought the galaxy would be better without humanity's unpredictable influence. They had been logically, mathematically, and completely wrong. Sometimes the most important truths could not be calculated. They had to be felt, fought for, and earned through the kind of unreasonable courage that came from the heart. Humanity had walked away silently when ordered to conform or leave, but when the galaxy faced extinction, they had returned with the same quiet determination that defined them. They had not come back to prove a point or claim vindication. They had come back because it was the right thing to do, and that was the most human reason of all.